is the depreciation and donation lands, which you probably know about a little bit if you're connected to this museum. And also the Venango Trail, that's going to be talked about a lot tonight. And also anything else, and I have a few little things like the Casper Reel and other fur tradesmen, the traders, that came north and traversed all of these lands, not just Allegheny City, the north side of Pittsburgh. So I think I want to start by showing you this. And again, you can look at all these things later. You can come up and look close. But this is an interesting name, genealogical. You think, person's genealogy, but it's the genealogy of Pennsylvania. This is the genealogical map of the counties, and I think you have it in the other room. And what it shows is that up here in 1784, Mercer County, it was just part of this big swath of land. Mercer County came out of Allegheny County, but guess what? Allegheny County came out of Westmoreland, they all just got like a big cookie that gets closer and closer and closer to the parts, smaller part. It started as a big pie and then got into tiny little pieces. And this is a wonderful map to really look at and digest where across the Allegheny Mountains, and when, I should say, each county came into existence. And it's something to keep in mind when I talk about, in a little bit, the early settlers that were in Allegheny town, and then also up here north, because a lot of them were from this area. They started with the rivers, the rivers on the eastern side, but a lot of them were from Philadelphia. And so the people that were supposed to be peopling this land with the new land deeds and warranties, they weren't coming. It wasn't a good sell in Philadelphia, because all over here, where you see the yellow, where you even see the green, the gray, and even the orange, which was right across the mountains, it was wilderness. It was the frontier until these dates passed. And his book greatly starts with this map. This is a nice big one that you guys can see. So the city of Pittsburgh, the north side. This is what the book is centered on. What was Allegheny town, and then borough, and then city, and then became the city of Pittsburgh. But this is a wonderful map. It's in the book, and it shows that it was surveyed by a gentleman named David Reddick. Benjamin Franklin put him up to the task. And I'm going to read a teeny little bit of commentary in my book that I think is interesting, that Reddick said about this land. And then up here, you're going to see this is Reserve Township, Shaler. That's later, of course, not ever in the very beginnings. But these big land tracts have names on them of guys who were speculators, and also in the city of Philadelphia, trying to get land over where the frontier was, over where the wilderness was, and where the Native Americans still were. David Reddick is the person who Benjamin Franklin put to the task. And Reddick went and surveyed this reserve tract into tiny little portions. And this is in my book. You can look at it with a magnifying glass. If you live on the north side, you could actually look and see who was supposed to be, not necessarily was, living in that land in the to start living in that land in the 1790s. But again, what happened is that in Philadelphia, they said, go over across the mountains and into the wilderness. There's nothing but, the quote was, beasts from the forest and miscreants. There's nobody over there. You want to make it this county seat? Pittsburgh was a little ahead of the game. Pittsburgh with the no H. And they were already protesting. They're like, you can't do that. There's only beasts from the forest over there. You can't make that the county seat. But it was still supposed to be the county seat for a little while. Well, anyway, David Reddick was told to survey the land, and he did, but there was one patch that he just completely didn't. He didn't like the task at all, but there was one part that was called high rough land. It's a big rectangle in the middle here, and he said, I really don't even need to look at the book at this point. I know the quote. He said, it's not fit for inhabitants of the moon. It's all rocky and craggy. And if you know the north side of Pittsburgh, especially deeper into the hills, further on out, before you would come up to the north here, it truly is that. Essentially, the land was demarcated that way in the 1790s, but you're probably wondering about depreciation and donation lands and how that affected the movement upward, northward. This is an interesting map that shows also land names of gentlemen. So it'd be really interesting to hear from you afterward with questions or comments. If you know of any families that carry any of the names that are on any of these maps. And I'll point out some of the names too when I go to another sheet in a moment. But these earliest settlers, again, a good many of them were never quite made it here. And the settlers are mainly were based on the Revolutionary War soldiers, because does anyone know about the depreciation lands and how they were different than the donation lands? I'm curious. No? The depreciation lands were right north of this tract. So in Philadelphia, they said to Pittsburgh, Allegheny town. What's going to be Allegheny, and then it became a town. That's going to be where the county seat is, okay? And above it, we're going to give the land to depreciation certificates given to Revolutionary War soldiers, because the money was just not backed by gold anymore. And rather than look for the quote, I'm just going to say that there was an expression that it's not even worth Commonwealth, because it was put on paper that wasn't backed by quotes. So what the guys in Philadelphia said is, we're going to give certificates that will be allowable for these soldiers to buy land at a depreciated value, at a good value, but the soldiers were mostly in Philadelphia, the eastern part of the state. And then they too were like, what in the world? I'm not going to go out across the Allegheny Mountains on stagecoach or horse, just alone, to try and get this. So you know what they did? They sold, they were hoping for a profit. Most of them sold their depreciation certificates to speculators. So the names you see, not so much there, the names you see here, when you look at these maps, or in the book, or here, or some of the names I'll read to you about Hampton, and also up here for this section, they are men who were speculators that robbed essentially the soldiers of vast fortune. But of course, the land needed to be cultivated, it had to be lived on and worked on, and then they get the deed is the final thing. Yeah, and it took a little bit of perseverance to consider actually working and doing what was required to have this as their own. I want to take a moment to talk about the Venango Trail, because it's going to figure later in the history and how we got up here to north. But at the same time that all this was happening with the white man, of course there were Native Americans living on the north side and up south of Erie, south of the lakes. And you probably know the main name. There's so many different, but the main type was the Iroquois. Yeah, excuse me. And basically, the Venango Trail is the trail that went all the way from the point to Pittsburgh. I asked a lot of folks when I first came in, who's been down to Pittsburgh. Not many have recently, but I'm sure you know the three rivers. The Venango Trail was started down here, and it went all the way up through to Fort Franklin. Actually, ironically, on the poster for me, I noticed, I peered at it closely, that's incorrect. Washington's placement of the Venango Trail on that poster is way it's going through like Butler. It's going through Route 8, and that's not correct. The Venango Trail started at the point and went northward. It later, tell you a foreshadowing, it later became the Franklin Road because of Fort Franklin and connecting Pittsburgh. It later became the Perrysville Plank Road, and now it's Perrysville Avenue. And of course, somewhere along there in the way with the Plank Road, it was the turnpike. It was a turnpike toll to go there. Okay, so when I talk about the Venango Trail, it's not just this one straight shot from the city of Pittsburgh all the way up. If you know Perrysville Avenue, it was serpentine. And the reason it was serpentine is because if you look to the right and you look to the left, the land just falls off. It was an Indian trail that they traversed on their horses and by foot, and they knew that on both sides it was just falling off. So they had to find a way to wend upward to Erie. So anyway, I digress in talking about the white man's settling, because the Venango Trail started as, down to the point and went upward. If you know the north side too, that along the river was called the Great Path. it went inward a little bit, where if you know about Allegheny Center Mall, that terrible construction that they're now redoing the traffic, the Great Path was East Ohio Street all the way to Western Avenue. It cut through, and so on the crossing of those two paths, the crossing of two Indian trails, is where tiny is where Allegheny Town was centered. And in the book, you can see these a little bit bigger. You know, obviously, one page is devoted to one quadrant of this after showing the whole thing. So Allegheny Town was centered on the original Indian paths going upward. Okay, and what else do I want to say about the depreciation and donation lands? First of all, I want to ask a question of the audience. You guys are kind of shy. Who knows? Who has heard the distinction between depreciation and donation lands? Because I didn't tell you yet why or how the donation lands were different than the depreciated land certificates that were given to the soldiers. Does anyone know? They were more north. They were more north than depreciated lands. Depreciation lands went up to so many counties. Part of Butler, not here, not quite here. It encompassed Katanning and Armstrong and Beaver to the west. But above that were the donation lands, and those were lands they weren't depreciated certificates. They were actual land grants given to soldiers that were captains and officers of higher rank. Yeah, but again, too, guess what? Do you think a lot of them came? No, they didn't.
So the farm that I live on,
Yes.
I bought from the granddaughter of someone who she told us it was a land grant property. It was divided into 3 or 4 farms for maybe it was her great grandfather. But I didn't know what that meant, but she said this is land grant property. This was original land grant.
Interesting. Yeah, what happened with all of these tracts, like I showed you here, it might look like, oh, that's not very much of a large territory. Each of these blocks with different guys' names on them, and by the way, it gives the east and west point and how they're all demarcated, that you could go out and find the rock and the it's very, very fascinating. But each of these are huge, and so that land grant that you're talking about would have been when they divvied it up to make it into different parcels. Not unlike, I'm jumping way to head to an area that I wasn't even going to talk about, but I'll just briefly say, to the area that my husband and I live on, it was once part of the McClintock Mansion tract of land. And so above us is a street called McClintock Street that's a dead end. It was a big mansion. It's that the remnants are still there, the foundation. And back behind the slope downward was all peach trees and orchards that the kids played on. In the 1870s, the family got older and kids moved away a little bit to the farms, to up north. That's how the migration happened later. And they divided up, they made streets, they divided up the estate, just like that would be divided up. Yeah.
So this is northern Butler County, on the Butler-Venango County line is where it is actually.
Say it a little bit louder for me and everybody.
The Butler-Venango County line is where this farm is. It's Butler County, but it's on the Venango County line. So that's how far up from
So it's far east it's much more east than Mercer.
Yeah.
Yes, interesting. Yeah. Does anybody else know? Oh, go ahead, please.
Oh,
No.
I was gonna say, 7 generations back, the grandfather, he was a justice of the peace, and he came up from Washington County
Okay.
and to Mercer County on the Ohio line, and he bought up the donation lands, which would have been about 1800s.
Wow. So you actually have record or historical record or knowledge at least.
Knowledge. And the one, Mount Hickory, is one of, he gave that to his daughter and her husband, and then the husband died. He did all his banking over in Cortland, Ohio, because there was no banking. It was the frontier, like you said.
It is frontier.
In the 1830s is about when he died.
Yes.
1840s, I think, early. Anyways, when she was a widow with 5 kids, she tried to keep the land. She couldn't, and James Pierce came down from New Hampshire and got her land on auction, and he's the one that kind of started the steel industry.
Did he then later divvy it up, probably, right?
Probably. I'm not sure, but I mean, he actually died. Well, he died in Sharpsville, which was actually Sharpsburg at that time, because they didn't know what the sheriff's were down in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
But post offices were a little waggy. But anyways, he died, he had a stroke, and then they took him out to Mount Hickory, because that was their summer home, and that's where he passed away.
Yeah, often what
And
happens.
he's also the great-grandfather of Barbara Bush.
Small world.
Yeah, so her father grew up in Sharpsville.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Often what would happen is those with money, of course, and cunning, right? The sly speculators would, take the depreciation certificates and from the soldiers, give them whatever they could for it, and then they came out here and they started to divide up. And before dividing up, they really staked claim and tried to stake claim on the land. Can you guys hear me all back there? Okay? Am I talking loud enough? A little bit louder?
Nope.
Oh, okay. Sorry. You have a question, comment? I saw you answer.
Your volume is good.
Good, it's good. Okay, cool. You brought up a good segue, the frontier and the 1830s, because Allegheny Town started. I talked to you about the crossing of the Indian paths, and it started as a town, but it became a borough in 1830. That's how many population grew so much. People were afraid to come over here, but then you may have heard of Mad Anthony Wayne. He was sent, some of you may. He was sent by George Washington, I believe. I could be wrong on that. Not by Franklin, I know though. And in the 1790s to, quote, clear out the whole territory of Indians, yeah? So in the 1790s, Mad Anthony Wayne came, and actually on the Allegheny Commons, where we walk our dog in the park down below, where there's now Lake Elizabeth on the north side, if you know it. That was all cleared of trees, and Mad Anthony Wayne came in and scalped the region and brought his forces in, and was fighting the Indians and drove them further up north and further west, of course. But at the same time, the white man was starting to build out little Allegheny Town. And Allegheny City was so interesting in that it was built on the Commons model of the Northeast, based on New England, but England, of course, New England based on England, whereas you have a town, and then around the town, you'd see in the book or on these maps, you'd see a rectangle. It's the Commons. It was common grazing land, common grazing land for cattle. And everybody that in Philadelphia that wanted to go to Allegheny Town, they knew that they were going to get an in lot and an out lot. You're probably thinking, what the hell is that? An in lot would be in the town, real close to the town somewhere, and then the out lot would be somewhere up the hill, like where we live. And you could farm up there, but you also have the commons to commonly graze too. Okay, a lot of people lucked out, and they had beautiful both, or one was kind of good, the other not so great. Some people really didn't luck out at all, and they were down by the river that constantly was flooding, and the three islands that were down at the point, not our point. I mean, not the point, but our side, on the north side, they would vanish, and then later became adhered to the north side with backfill, industrial waste. But there were three islands there, and they're all in the books. Not so much on these maps, but they're in the books maps. It's really quite fascinating. But in the pasture and in the borough, in the pasture land, and in the forest that was still well above Allegheny Town, were tradesmen. I saw it noted in the book that I had forgotten about, that one of them was noted as a half-breed, I guess Indian mother, or probably Indian father, and white woman mother. Caspar Reel. Have you guys ever heard of Caspar Reel? No? He was a fur trader and a trapper, and you better believe he not only traversed Allegheny Town, but he was traversing up beyond Westview, Westview, and into Ross and Shaler, that later was, of course, way later, captured up by Robert McKnight when he moved from the north side. But Caspar Reel was a fur trader who also traded with all of the white men and natives that were living in this area, and you're probably wondering, how did these guys actually get peopled with white colonists and settlers? They came from the northern section of the Allegheny River. Yeah, the Allegheny River, of course, in Pittsburgh is part of the three rivers. It seems like it's not doing anything unusual, but once, as you know, it comes up northward and it goes through Katanning, and so the way to get to the frontier, the western part of Pennsylvania, was not just the Allegheny Mountains, it was also the river. And trappers and traders were constantly intermingling with the white man. And there was actually quite a lot of good intermingling, but there was also bad intermingling, a lot of bad stuff, early on especially. But even during the 1830 era, the borough, who's ever heard of James Sample? Has any of the Sample? Yeah, James Sample down in Millville in Pittsburgh. There's still a portion of his house. His wife was taken from the natives, and then a little bit later there was some good relations between Colonel Sample and the natives, and he was able to get his wife back. Just incredible stories. But Casper Reel and other fur traders were starting to bring what was happening in Allegheny Town north, all the way north to up here. So we have the borough era, and I see if I want to, yeah, it's time to talk about the Venango Trail. I mentioned the Venango Trail becoming Perrysville way later, but the Venango Trail was called the Old Franklin Road for the reason that it connected the Fort Franklin down to the city of Pittsburgh. And does anyone know I'm giving it away a little bit, in 1812, what was going on in this section of, yeah, I'm seeing people's, there was a war of 1812. We were fighting England again, yeah, England was fighting with us again. Who's heard of, and you should have heard of this name, because it's not only Commodore Perry, but all of Perry's relatives, I see, are in the history of this area. Commodore Perry was, that's the fancy brigadier general, fancy name for the swashbuckling captain. We have a nice mural on the north side that the kids have posted of Commodore Perry. He took hemp from the rope works down in Allegheny Town, and he, via stagecoach and horse, brought that hemp all the way up to Lake Erie via the Old Franklin Road. The Old Franklin Road is what they called it. So the Venango Trail had suddenly, or not quite so suddenly, after several decades, had become it was an Indian trail, and then the Indians, the natives, they saw that it was becoming a route to get to the lake for war. Yeah. Later, during the a little bit beyond borough era and into when it was becoming Allegheny City, Perrysville was plank road. They put planks on the road. And there was also the Butler Pike. Does anyone maybe want to guess what road the Butler Pike was? I'm going to give you a hint. It's not from the north side, but it's close to the north side, and it comes up to as far north as here, I do believe.
Route 8.
Route 8.
Yeah, Route 8. How far does Route 8 go? Does it come into Mercer? It goes through Venango. Okay, so there was the Butler Plank Road, and also the Perrysville Plank Road. And there was and it became a toll road for a little bit when they were trying to make some money, and then the toll booths were taken down and out. Let's see. I mentioned Commodore Perry. I wanted to find out actually if you guys had heard of, let's see, the Old Franklin Road, Perrysville Plank Road. Yeah, I wanted to remember I had mentioned earlier, I wanted to mention some names and see if genealogically or even just history of your area, if you know these, because these are the ones these are the names that were connected with the depreciation and donation lands. One name was, where is it here? Samuel Campbell. Earliest notations that I noticed, checked out on the earliest maps, also showed up in the history of this county. Anybody heard of Samuel Campbell or Campbell's?
There's a lot of Campbells around.
Yeah, there's a lot. My grandfather was Edward Campbell, but his sons were William and James. So.
Interesting. How about, I mentioned Perry, and I mentioned when I said Commodore Perry, there was also, this was news to me, William Perry and Samuel Perry. Up here, are there any Perry landmarks or?
Perry High School.
That's in the north side. Do you want as well? Oh, okay. I was going to say.
Commodore Perry High School.
Okay, cool. It's a good time for me to make mention of something that I don't want to forget, which is that this book, and I'm saying it not for the sake of the book, I'm saying it for all of you to consider doing your own research. You do realize that all of what I found out about Allegheny City and further was found at the PA Historical and Museum Commission. They have a name almost as convoluted as this wonderful name of this one. The Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission gave me a grant to do this book. And in there you can go and look up anything. I was focused on the Allegheny City archives that were found at the University of Pittsburgh in a loading dock area. They were all crumbled and dusty and dirty, and two guys from Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission came down and they looked at it, and they were so fascinated that they didn't expedite what they were supposed to do, which was just decide, should we take it back to Harrisburg or not? They were fascinated with it, and they said, we've got to get this cataloged. So they brought it back to Harrisburg. And I, around that time, I was drinking a cup of coffee on a Sunday morning at home, and I had written a first book prior to that. And I vowed I'd never write another book. It was a biography of a woman artist who was institutionalized, living in Greenwich Village, etc. It did pretty well. Nothing like this book. When this book was published, again, it's the 7th printing. Regional bestsellers, or local history, or just regional bestsellers. People devour them. So I said to myself when I was looking at the Post-Gazette article about these two librarians finding this stuff on the dirt loading dock, almost in the dirt, almost cast away. I said, I bet that would make a fascinating read. And little did I know that in the Allegheny City archives in Harrisburg are also all the land archives of Hampton Township, Mercer County, Venango County. It's tedious. If you can't just, it's not like a nice little click and you go to, you think you're going to find a nice read. You're going to see guys' names alphabetical, or you're going to see things encapsulated, but in paraphrases. But then you have to dig deeper. But it's all there and it's available to be digested. And today, I also discovered that now the land records of Pennsylvania generally are I quote that the land records of Pennsylvania are the most complete in the whole nation.
Wow.
Yeah, it was fascinating to me, because the quote that got me for those two guys that were at the library and they were not doing their job properly, and they stayed in Pittsburgh a little bit too long. They said, what we're looking at here at the loading dock is the largest find of the cultural and social history of any place in Pennsylvania. We need to get this dock back to Harrisburg. It's the largest cultural and social find where there's information. And when I went, believe me, you could find things as mundane as plumbing records. I was in a big box thinking it's going to be a gold mine of stuff, and I pull out files and it's just, when John Bashir got his plumbing, but that's interesting, the rich and very historic astronomy gentleman, and then you see down, the poor on the next street over actually got plumbing around the same time. That's how egalitarian it was there. Plus there'd be a small little file, and I'd think nothing in it, and it would give total great detail about the land. Just someone had encapsulated that, and so I would encourage you, if you are all interested in learning more about what what your county here and in all of the area in Mercer County, in Grove City in particular, you should really consider looking at those records. Okay, before I go on a little bit more, I want some thoughts. Any questions based on what I've laid out so far? Anybody? Yeah, I thought I saw it.
A comment, I'm sorry.
A comment, yeah.
The reason that a lot of those soldiers sold their land was because they were bankrupt. They couldn't afford it. It was expensive. And if you had insurance, which was a very, very small number of the population, your insurance was automatically canceled if you went west of the Alleghenies, like State College.
That's a comment on insurance that I was not even familiar. I was about to say, are you sure there was even insurance with the Revolutionary?
Yes, not the Revolutionary.
Oh, not the Revolutionary?
No, just if you were a lawyer, well-to-do in Philadelphia,
yeah,
and you had insurance, which was very rare in 1790s, but if you went west, I investigated this because when I joined the Navy and the Submarine Corps, for many years, your insurance was, if you did anything really stupid, like join the Submarine Corps,
yeah,
you lost your insurance.
Yeah.
And other things like that. There are other things, but specifically to this conversation, if you went west of the Alleghenies, your life insurance was no longer, that was considered suicide.
Absolutely.
And it was no longer valid.
Very good, interesting, very, very interesting. Yeah, like I said, I have focused on and in the book I focused on the material cost of the land and the depreciation certificates, and the fear of the natives that
Did you
kept
ever
them
cut down a
away.
tree with an axe?
Yeah, really, yeah.
And so they give you 100 acres and you have thousands of trees that all have to be cut down.
Right, they have to be
With an axe.
felled with, yeah.
Yeah.
I want to comment on the lawyer thing in a minute, but you had a question or a comment? I think?
I was told that Route 19 used to be referred to as Perry Plank Road.
Well, yeah.
And then every so often you would see, that you'll see a house of similar design at regular intervals, and those were the folks that were assigned putting the planks on the road.
Fascinating.
Wow.
The ones that had the very mundane houses, like interesting. That's the first time you guys are bringing up that's what these conversations are great for. They bring up, innocuous little stuff that everyone is always continually learning. The only thing I could say about the structures relating to those pikes, they called them pikes, the little turnpike previous era, is that some of the structures supposedly survived for a while. There was one down at the bottom of Perrysville Avenue and one at the start of Westview. But I didn't know anything about the guys that might have put the planks down. Fascinating. And by the way, it was called Route 19 is Perrysville Avenue. People might go think, isn't that McKnight Road? No, McKnight Road is Business 19. That was made when a whole neighborhood was felled. But Perrysville and the Venango Trail is essentially that road that you just described.
19.
Yeah.
Perry Plank Road.
You mentioned lawyers because
Or a merchant, or any
or merchants,
well-to-do.
yeah, because it's true. It wasn't just the Revolutionary War soldiers that were saying, I think I'm gonna forfeit. I'm gonna sell my depreciation certificate. It was also lawyers that were starting to think about coming over because they knew that this land had some people starting, and coming over and settling, and they knew that they had. There was always a need for lawyers, but then they had troubles when they got over here to really get established. Basically, it was very, very difficult in the earliest of time, and the natives again this was their land, and they learned the scalping from the French. And the atrocities that they played out on the white man were atrocities that they saw played out on them.
They weren't singing Kumbaya by themselves
Yeah.
before we showed up.
Also, it's interesting that you brought up what you did and when I was talking about Casper Grill and the traders, the points of connection between Allegheny City's history, Allegheny Town's history, is the fur trade. Those traders, Casper Real and his son, I forget the son's name, but it's something Real as well. He ventured further north than Casper did, and had good connection with the first white settler. Do you know the first white settler in this area? The name Stokely? You probably don't.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, have you heard of it? Stokely. And I try to make parallels between the first white person on the native, supposedly, on the north side. And that was a man named, first I should go way back to 1740, down the Allegheny River. Supposedly there was a guy on a little canoe, a birch bark canoe, and he wasn't a native, but he just continued on. He didn't stop. But there is recorded in Harrisburg and in some of the histories of Pittsburgh about that happening. Then there was a man named Andrew Long. Probably nobody's heard of him because you all possibly have heard about James Robinson. The north side is the Robinsons. Became mayor later. He gets all the hype. But it was Andrew Long who had a house felled with trees that were felled by an axe. And he was the first guy with guts to go over there while it was still quite the miscreants of the forest, as I talked about. And his family got massacred. And so after that, people were still looking over from Pittsburgh saying, I don't want to go over there. And people from Philadelphia weren't ready to go over there. But then this Benjamin Franklin survey happened, and it was just on paper, right? So the names on paper are people that were given the deed supposedly in Philly, but very few of them actually materialized. But some did. And in North Side history of Pittsburgh, you'll see that. And that's why in the history of where you live up here, not so much in this map, but this one in particular, that's what I was curious about, and if you dig further with your museum, as well as PA Land Records and PA Historical Museum Commission, you'll find names that some of them did seep through and people the early land up here. The trading posts were very communal between Native Americans and the fur traders. And those trading posts are what linked Allegheny Town's early beginnings with coming up here to Venango and to Mercer County and all the way to Fort Franklin. To differing degrees. In the War of 1812, it was a little bit more military-industrial already, huh? Yeah, in this country, you know, the fact that what was going on, going up that Venango Trail, Perrysville Plank Road at that time, had an intent of war. Later it was commerce. When it was the Perrysville Plank Road with the toll and the turnpike, it was to bring commerce up north to people, your county and your area. Let's see, I wanted to highlight a couple other things, but feel free to raise your hand if you wanted to comment on some stuff too. I thought I saw a couple hands peeking up.
So Route 8, what we call Route 8, was a toll road at one time?
You know, actually, Route 8 probably was also a toll road, I think it was. But for sure, Perrysville Avenue, in other words, Route 19, was a toll road.
On the way north of Harrisville on Route 8, there was always, it's just before you drop down a little hill into Barkeyville, on the left-hand side, going north,
Yeah.
there was this concrete structure that sat in a little indent for years and years and years.
Yes.
And I was always told that was
A toll house.
Yeah.
A toll house. And Toll House was correctly the name, that's where Toll House cookies came from. Yeah. Pittsburgh's name, I wanted to mention to you, early Pittsburgh, before it was Pittsburgh without the H, it was Pittsburgh, it was called Shanapin Town. Shanapin Town.
Say it again.
Shanapin Town. Shanapin is an Indian name. Shanapin, Shanopin.
It was before Pittsburgh.
Okay, I want to, I wanted to left some things up here because I did want to read some stuff too. Relating to what we just talked about, this is from, I should give you the context, the Western Pennsylvania Historical Magazine, January 1925. So Western Pennsylvania Historical Magazine is a great magazine, it goes way back. I highlighted for myself that much of the best land in Allegheny Town, in all areas north, depreciation and donation lands, much of it was obtained by land speculators. 2 persons obtained 48 warrants from the actual settlers and obtained patents for 23,000 acres of land. I'm not big on is that a lot of land, 23 acres?
Yeah.
23,000.
Yeah.
23,000.
Right,
That's
yeah,
a lot of land.
right.
So can you imagine getting 48 warrants for 23,000 acres of land lying on both sides of the Venango Trail, now Perry Highway? That's what they're referencing it as. This land was all sold to settlers in the early part of the last century, and some of it is still owned by the descendants of the original purchasers. So that's what's fascinating to me, that up here you may have indeed some areas that still retain, whether it be a tavern's name. That's when you look in history, you look for the taverns, because that's where the lawyers and the speculators kind of met. And some of them have a history going way, way back. In Pittsburgh, we have a building that sits at a little crossroads. It's the oldest building in Pittsburgh. Hardly anybody knows about it, but it's now historically marked, and it's got a 250 sign on it for the nation's history. It's down in the West End. Do you know the West End Valley in Pittsburgh, across the West End Bridge, from the north side going over to the south part of Pittsburgh, yeah? That little valley, there's a little curve of the road, and do you believe it's still plucked? Right there at the curve of the road is a building with stone foundation and decaying brick and decaying stone, not just foundation, but stone, first and second floor. And it was from the 1770s. It's still standing. It needs love and care. But there are remnants of all of those things around to different degrees, even Samples House, as I mentioned, in Millville. But an old house like that would be a place where, and this is not just me saying it would be a place where George Washington would have stopped. Yeah, it would be a place where the goings on of the most important things that were to happen in the city of Pittsburgh and in Allegheny City would have been talked about over drink and in-depth talk for these gentlemen. So kind of have tied in as much as I can. So thirsty, sorry. As much as I can, Mercer County. I want to know a little bit more about Mercer County from you all, if possible. And if you don't have anything else, what I want to do is just tell you quickly what happened at the end of Allegheny City's history, how it became this, the city of Pittsburgh. So it's just a little quick encapsulation to be a good bookend for the story of Allegheny City and the demise of the city that probably would have been your closest connection, not city. I wouldn't be saying to you in the beginning of the talk, hey, have you been down to Pittsburgh recently? It would have been, have you been down to Allegheny City? Yeah? So before I go there, are there any other thoughts on this area? I see some of you taking notes, and that's cool. I don't know if it's for school or for research. You want to? No.
I'm new to town, so I'm just learning.
Ah, cool. Very cool. That's good. That's very good as well. Yeah.
So
Anybody?
you
Any other
re-
questions? Yeah, please.
You referred to the hemp works?
Yeah, the Irwin Rope Works.
Okay.
John Irwin was an early settler, speculator settler, in Pittsburgh. And yes, the rope works made cordage hemp for the sails of the boats from Commodore Perry.
Yeah, on the way to Greenville, there's an area that there's hemp, I wish I could.
Hempville.
In my head.
Hempville
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Township.
Hempville, oh, that's
Yeah.
true, Hempville Township, I never really connected. Yeah, I'm sure
I
that,
didn't think of that.
yeah.
But I thought it was part of the road for like the Portage Railroad for the canals, but that makes better sense that it would have been for
It
the,
was, it was
for
for,
the
it was
ships.
for the boats, the ships, yeah, absolutely.
Or
Absolutely.
any barn,
Say again?
any barn. You're not lifting hay from the ground to the second story of a barn with leather straps.
Yeah, it was.
You're using hemp rope.
Hemp,
It's
yeah.
not just for sailors. You know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but this is what this was famous, you know,
Yeah.
he famously went up that trail, up
Yeah.
the Venango Trail, yeah.
Which is
Other-
also an Indian word.
Say,
Venango.
Venango is an Indian word. Ohio River, Ohio is, it was
Allegheny,
fair water, meant fair
Monongahela.
waters.
Yeah.
The best one is Monongahela, I'll save it for last. Allegheny is the LaBelle River, no, Ohio is LaBelle Riviere, sorry. Allegheny is fair waters, and guess what Monongahela stands for? Think about, if you, I'm sure in your mind's eye you can picture the city of Pittsburgh, and what do you see when you're in the city of Pittsburgh and you're looking to the south? You see that huge Mount Washington, right?
Right.
Big embankment. Well, the Monongahela, the name Monongahela meant high banks falling off in ridges. High ridges falling off the bank, down into the bank, something to that effect.
Wow.
That was why it was called Monongahela. Yeah. I'm going to tell you about the consolidation and the end of it, the end of Allegheny City, but in the interest of time. But please know that after that, we can still talk about any of the history of where you are from here and anything that comes up to mind. So I told you that it was the third largest city, right? Yeah. But you know what? Allegheny town. I'm going to go back to where I talked about the commons. It was so cool because only in New England would you see that. Would you see a beautiful little town where people were having, you know, like there's pasture lane and the Indian Trail it was based on that, and you had common grazing land, and everybody was getting along, and it continued through the borough era. Borough just meant that they got encapsulated as a borough, or that's not the right word legally, but they were allowed by the Commonwealth of PA to become a borough because they had enough population. During the borough era, we had the Pennsylvania Canal come down and through, but the commons still existed, and everybody in Pittsburgh coveted Allegheny from way back. From even like I said, they didn't want Allegheny to become the county seat. You're probably thinking it didn't. You're right. Pittsburgh protested too much, and so because nobody was coming over, it was too much wilderness. And they're like, what are you talking about? There's only, you got to let out the beasts from the, from the jails to, the miscreants from the jails, and the beasts in the forest are going to be the ones that are going to the county. So Pittsburgh got that. Then the canal came through, and Pittsburgh cried, and they wanted the canal. But Allegheny had the perfect spot for the canal, right down by the stadium, right by PNC Park. That was where the canal went, dumped into the. So Pittsburgh got there, they got an extra little bridge that dropped the canal over there as well. In the 1830s, they were already talking in Pittsburgh city councils about, why don't we have part of that land? Why isn't that ours? Why is it called Allegheny Borough? shouldn't that be part of Pittsburgh without the H still? And so everybody in Allegheny Council said, no way, no way. It continued all the way up until 1840s when Allegheny Borough became Allegheny City. And by the way, because my grant money was to look at the research that was dealing with the city, I had to do a whole lot of focus on the 1840s on up, and I didn't talk about that with you. I didn't want to bore you because I wanted to focus on the land and Mercer County, but it's very interesting in the book. But from 1840s and on, Pittsburgh continued to talk. We need to get that, we need to get them, we need to co-opt them. And Allegheny was not only known for their, well, I should first say, you know what they were known for? Two things. People from the city of Pittsburgh, which was already starting to become early smoky, not super smoky yet, later it got really smoky due to industry. But you could stand in downtown Pittsburgh and you could look across at Allegheny, and what did you see? You could still see the commons grazing land, and you could see the rolling little land, like where my husband and I live on the hills above, where they had goats and chickens. It was like city, but it was also country. And you know what they also had? They had and this is an imperceptible sort of thing, but everybody knew it. It was documented. Allegheny was a little bit more cultivated. Allegheny had a little bit better culture. It had a little bit better something than the city of Pittsburgh. They were kind of pushy and aggressive, the city of Pittsburgh. And Allegheny was more refined, and they kept pushing to get Allegheny, but Allegheny had enough reserve to just keep it. Nope, that's not going to happen. Then something happened that's not unlike, I should say, to what's going on in the Middle East right now, in that Pittsburgh got the name for something. They called it the Greater Pittsburgh Project. And what they wanted to do with the Greater Pittsburgh is they wanted to swallow up Allegheny. And they eventually did. And you know how they did it? They did it by the university being in Allegheny, and they didn't care for it. The university was over there on the land that my husband and I live on, Perry Hilltop, where there was John Bashir and the telescope. He made Allegheny time for all around the world. Telescopes sent all around the world. Allegheny town was known for the culture right around that university where that observatory was. And the city of Pittsburgh didn't like it. And the city of Pittsburgh wanted it moved across the river. And they incorporated they blended, they merged the idea of getting a greater Pittsburgh means more enlightenment. But Allegheny was the one that was the enlightened side of the river, not Pittsburgh. But they kept pushing and pushing, and then they put it to a vote. And it was the wrong type of vote, because it was a vote that the city of Pittsburgh could vote on, and Allegheny town could vote on, Allegheny City could vote on, but there was more population in the city of Pittsburgh. Everybody in the city of Pittsburgh said, yeah, we want Allegheny. And everybody in Allegheny said, nope, we're staying here, except for a few of the people on the board of the university that had the money slipped to them to co-opt. And so the vote was corrupt. And in 1907, November of 1907, because my book was published in November of 2007, Allegheny was no more. The city of Pittsburgh swallowed up the third largest city in the state. Yeah. So people to this day, there are old timers colleagues of mine who helped me in mentoring me with this book, and they still write in their mail, search Sheffield Street, Allegheny City, and then the zip, because the zip identifies it. Right. Very proud. Very they wanted to secede and go to secede from Pittsburgh and go back. So anyway, that's the story of how Allegheny City became part of the city of Pittsburgh. And I think I'll formally end my talk with that, but I want to encourage you to come up and take a peek at the book, take a peek at these maps. This is a book, Indian Paths of Pennsylvania, that I utilized because this is a great map that I didn't make a Xerox of, but it's earmarked here. This shows the Venango Trail, all the way from the lower end of the Allegheny River, not what's on the poster, unfortunately. George Washington got it wrong. It's all the way up Perrysville Avenue. And you can see it from Shanapin Town. It says Shanapin Town from Pittsburgh all the way upward. I utilized a lot of books like these, including the Ice Age Peoples of Pennsylvania, because I started my book with an area that nobody else has ever done. There's a lot of history of the natives in Pittsburgh, the French and Indian War, but there was nothing written about the natives north. And so I wanted to talk about the natives. That's why I utilized Indian Pass and other books like that. But I also wanted to start the book with, well, I actually started it in a different place, but early on in the book, I started, I'll get back to that in a second. I started it where the Ice Age peoples it shows the Keys Rocks Indian Mound and the Hampton Indian Mound, a little bit south of you guys here. You were dealing with glaciers up here. But below there were Indian mounds and also Meadowcroft. Who's been to Meadowcroft?
Going next year.
Yeah, you need to go. Meadowcroft, what's the word? Competes with Clovis, Arizona, as the first. Yeah, so you need to go to Meadowcroft. It's just a little bit south of Pittsburgh. It's like 45 minutes southwest. So I show them on a map in the book, so you have some sense of the earliest peoples, not just natives. And then I take poetic liberty in the beginning to have Allegheny land describe what she's looking at, because Allegheny is very beautiful. The three rivers right there are very sacred, and what they see with the sunrise and the sunset on the Ohio, the sunrise on the Allegheny and the sunset on the Ohio, it's lush territory with fowl of all type, and FOWL, bird fowl, and back then, of course, had so many trees, much more than even now, but it's being better cared for. So the book kind of incorporates the start there and then ending with, it doesn't really end in 1907, because what I do is I also look at the north side on the modern times at the very last chapter. Back in 2007, when I wrote the book, the North Shore was the new darling name for stadiums. Mm-hmm. People on the north side were like, what the hell's the North Shore? It's not a shore. And we've been living here for decades, some of us, years. And it's the north side. Don't try glamorizing it. It's the north side that has a ton of different neighborhoods. But anyway, so the book talks a little bit about teeny bit about modern times as well. Okay? But anyway, feel free to come up and or to ask questions privately or communally. Anything else for the group? Yeah.
Do you by any chance have a map of Pittsburgh today? So, because I'm not from the area and I really don't know what North Shore.
All of Pittsburgh? I do not have all of Pittsburgh.
So that way it could kind of, okay.
I don't have all of Pittsburgh. It would be way too big. But I do have a pretty cool map here. This is in the book, but man, it doesn't convey in the book very well. You need to see it large. This is the Allegheny. This is the north side of Pittsburgh.
Oh, okay.
So there's the point. Notice the point's not very prominent there. It's like, that's not the point.
Oh, okay.
That's the point. Here's the Allegheny, here's the Monongahela, the stub, and then Ohio River. And these are all the neighborhoods of the north side. Oh, and an interesting thing that comes to my mind is when the town was right here, it was just a town. And then it was just 4 little wards. No, I think in the very beginning it was like the first ward, the second ward, the third ward, the fourth ward, and then it grew and grew and grew and grew and grew and grew to all these different. That's what happens with municipalities. And Reserve Township is right there. Reserve's a little bit there too. Spring Garden Borough has always been this weird demarcated dotted line thing that also shows up over here. And I never could figure it out. I'll have to look it up sometime. It shows up on another early map. Like, why is Spring Garden Borough? It wasn't called that back then, but it was somebody had a special something or other with that land that they wanted to say something about it. Yes.
Where does Allegheny City end? Does it end at the end of Allegheny County now?
Well, Allegheny City is no more. It's now the north side of Pittsburgh.
Right.
So if you're asking where does the north side end, it goes up as far as into Ross Township. Okay. Bellevue was the start of a new borough. Reserve Township, Reserve, and then of course here is the city of Pittsburgh, and this is McKees Rocks.
So all of that was Allegheny City.
But it didn't. It not in the beginning. In the beginning, remember to take you all back. In the very beginning, isn't it funny? It was the cup shape. It was this big cup shape of the reserved. I didn't focus on that enough, and I should have. This was called the reserved tract opposite Pittsburgh. I talked a lot about the depreciation lands and donation lands to try to tie it in for you guys. But the reserved tract was what was reserved for the county seat, remember? Right. Let's go, in Philadelphia, they said, Franklin said, go, David Reddick, go and survey this reserved tract. so that we can get a county seat over there. And he did it, but he didn't like doing it. And he gave up on the high rough land. That was James O'Hara's later. But, so that's, this reserve tract was supposed to be reserved for something special, to be the county seat. And it ended up being something very special. Like I said, it had a reputation for gentility, is the word I was looking for. It had a reputation that was more enlightened than the city of Pittsburgh, definitely. And so it's a very unique history, but again, within the threads of the book are the threads of how the migration happened with the trappers and the white men going north, and how Commodore Perry extended that as well, military industrially, and just the rail, not the railroad so much as although the short line went up there too, the little railroad tracks at first, called the short line through the northern counties, but through the plank roads, the connection.
I grew up in Wexford and the Harmony Short Line went through there.
Yeah, definitely. So Wexford would be.
Yeah.
You can actually see on this map. There's another map that I didn't bring, but it shows, where Wexford, how that grew. I don't know. I think in the book there's a little bit of that. So, lot of good history in maps for sure. You can find out so much. It's where you should start. When you think about your neighborhood, or your land, your house, you should look at these maps for your area, and you can get them. You can explore them at these places that I described. Any other thoughts? Questions?
The Romans did the same thing.
The Romans?
Yeah, they would give their soldiers, which retired from the Roman army, they would give the land, but it was always land over there.
Like
It was
in
never in
England.
Italy.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
in France with the Gauls,
Yes.
or it was in Spain, or with the Russians.
Yeah.
And you would be like the perimeter, out,
Right.
So you notice that they didn't give the Revolutionary veterans, they didn't give them land in Lancaster County
Right.
or in Dauphin County or any of those counties east
But
of
that wouldn't have
Mississippi.
fit. But that also wouldn't have fit the mold of what the county, what Philadelphia was trying to do. Which was So they were trying to match this with the idea that we got to get people out there. This was the frontier. Ohio history. Ohio. Some of you may know about what the Western Reserve. I think it's fascinating. I lived in Boardman for a little while. Growing up, my dad's company was transferred there, and I always hated Ohio. It was so flat. But I was fascinated in Ohio history. In 7th grade Ohio history class, about the Buckeye and about the Western Reserve, because we lived right near Western Reserve Road, and how that was connected to Maryland and the frontier.
Connecticut.
It's very fascinating.
I'm chuckling at your comment about Ohio, it's so flat. I moved here and I'm like, is there no such thing as a flat piece of land? And they're like, oh honey, it's the rolling hills of Pennsylvania.
And all because of the way the roads are constructed, right? I heard somebody say once, it's so impossible to try to describe how to get to my house. I need to tell you to take the second turkey foot on the third, because that's what Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania is. It's turkey foot intersections. It's not a grid.
When you design a road for horses, and then you get cars capable of doing 60 miles an hour, life gets interesting.
Well, I just read this morning and looking at Sewickley, I wanted to see if Sewickley had anything to say about this area up here, and it did a little bit, which I incorporated. But Sewickley, more rich sort of neighborhood outside of Pittsburgh, the north side, it's all on a diagonal because of the river. Whoever laid out Sewickley said, we're going to lay it out on a diagonal because the Allegheny or the Ohio River is on a diagonal there. Because people there wondered, why is this strangely not a grid?
It was like last week I was down in Portsmouth, Ohio, on the Ohio River, and across to Kentucky, and it says South Shore, Kentucky, and I'm thinking, well, that would be the North Shore. so it must be Portsmouth said this is our South Shore, but it's in Kentucky.
Yeah.
I don't know, so I have to look that up, but it's all very fascinating that just how
Perspective.
The demarcation of land and names as well, for sure. I want to thank you all so much for coming. A really nice audience in mass, really wonderful. Thanks, Lisa. Thank you.
cookies and punch
Cookies and
in the lobby yet.